Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence, lifted his hand toward the cameras, and said one word: "Stop." The studio fell silent. Crew members exchanged uncertain looks. The guest, a woman named Sarah, sat shaking in her seat with tears running down her face. Dr. Phil glanced toward his producers off camera and said firmly, "Bring him in." What followed in the next 10 minutes became one of the most meaningful moments ever captured on the show. Just 36 hours earlier, Sarah Martinez had walked into the Dr. Phil studio, carrying a secret she had kept for 28 years. The producers knew she was there to talk about childhood trauma and her long journey toward recovery. What they didn't know was that Sarah had made a request they believed would be nearly impossible. She wanted to locate the firefighter who saved her life when she was 7 years old. The fire occurred in 1996 in a small apartment complex in Phoenix, Arizona. Sarah's mother had been working an overnight shift, leaving her alone when faulty wiring ignited a blaze that spread through the building within minutes. She remembered the smoke, the heat, and the realization that she was trapped in her bedroom. Then she saw a figure pushing through the smoke, a firefighter, tall and covered in soot, who lifted her and carried her down 3 flights of stairs. She remembered his voice saying, "I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now." He handed her to paramedics, and she never saw him again. But that firefighter gave her more than safety. He gave her the strength to keep going through everything that came afterward. Sarah grew up in foster care. Her mother, overwhelmed by guilt and untreated mental health issues, was no longer able to care for her. Sarah moved through 7 different homes, struggling with PTSD, anxiety, and a deep sense of not belonging. "The only thing that kept me going," Sarah told the intake producer during pre-interview, "was remembering that someone risked their life for me. Someone who didn't even know me chose to save me. That meant my life had to matter." Sarah had spent years trying to find that firefighter. She contacted the Phoenix Fire Department, searched old records, and posted online, but found nothing. Record systems had changed in the early 2000s, and many files from the 1990s were incomplete or gone. Then she watched an episode of Dr. Phil about reunions and decided to try again. The producers were moved by her story, but careful about expectations. "We'll do everything we can," they told her, "but we need you to be prepared in case we can't locate him." Sarah nodded. "I understand. Even if we don't find him, I need to share my story. I want people who've experienced trauma to know that one act of kindness can influence a life for decades." Behind the scenes, the research team began searching. They reviewed fire department logs, contacted retired firefighters, and cross-checked shift schedules from that night in 1996. After 72 hours of focused investigation, they found him, Captain Michael Torres, now retired and living in Scottsdale. They chose not to tell Sarah beforehand, so her reaction on camera would be genuine. When filming day arrived, Sarah sat in the familiar Dr. Phil chair. Nervous but resolute, she wore a simple blue dress and held a small photograph, the only picture she had from before the fire, taken when she was 7, smiling with missing front teeth. Dr. Phil started the interview with his usual straightforward approach. "Sarah, you're here because you want to find someone. Tell us about that." Sarah took a slow breath. "When I was 7, my apartment building caught fire. I was trapped, and I thought I was going to die. Then a firefighter came through the smoke and saved me. I never got to thank him. I never even knew his name." The audience listened quietly, leaning in. Dr. Phil's expression was focused and compassionate. "That firefighter gave me more than my life," Sarah continued, her voice shaking. "He gave me hope. Every time I wanted to give up, and there were many times, I remembered that someone cared enough to risk everything for me. A stranger. That meant I had to keep going. I had to make my life worth saving." Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Sarah, what would you say to him if he were here today?" Tears fell steadily as she answered. "I would tell him he saved me twice. Once from the fire, and once from losing myself. I would tell him I became a social worker because of him, and that I've spent the last 10 years helping children in foster care because he showed me what one person can do. I would tell him. She paused, trying to gather herself. I would tell him he's my hero, and I just want him to know that what he did mattered. The audience was openly emotional. Even the camera crew wiped their eyes. Dr. Phil leaned back in his chair, and there was a noticeable shift in his expression. He glanced toward the producers offstage, then back at Sarah. Sarah, you said you've been searching for this firefighter for years. Yes, she whispered, but I've never been able to find him. That's when Dr. Phil did something unexpected. He stood up, lifted his hand toward the cameras, and said, "Stop the tape." The studio went silent. This simply didn't happen. Dr. Phil never stops recording. Producers exchanged uncertain looks. The audience stayed still, unsure of what was coming next. Dr. Phil focused on Sarah. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something. Sarah's face lost its color. Did something happen to him? No, Dr. Phil said calmly. Sarah, we found him. Captain Michael Torres. He's retired now, living in Scottsdale, and he's been watching your story from backstage. Sarah's hands rose to her mouth. Her whole body trembled. He's here, she whispered. Dr. Phil turned toward the side entrance and nodded. Captain Torres, please join us. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most meaningful part of this story is still ahead. The studio doors opened, and a man in his late 50s stepped onto the stage. He was tall, with gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent many years running toward emergencies. He wore his formal fire department uniform, medals pinned to his chest. Sarah stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped. For a moment, she simply stared at him as if unsure he was real. Captain Torres stopped a few steps from her, his eyes already red. Sarah, he said, his voice strained with emotion. You came, she whispered. You actually came. Sweetheart, he said softly, using the same word he'd used 28 years ago. I never forgot you. Sarah broke down. She stepped forward and fell into his arms, sobbing. Captain Torres embraced her tightly, tears streaming down his face as well. The studio audience rose together, applauding through their tears. Camera operators kept filming despite their own emotions. Dr. Phil stood nearby, giving them space, his eyes damp. No one in the studio or watching at home expected this moment. After several minutes, Sarah and Captain Torres separated, though she kept hold of his hand, almost afraid he might vanish. I tried to find you, Sarah said. I tried so many times. I tried to find you too, Captain Torres replied. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about you. I checked with the department, but they said you'd gone into foster care and the records were sealed. I wondered about you for 20 years. Dr. Phil guided them to sit down, pulling up an extra chair so Captain Torres could sit beside her. The audience settled back, but the energy in the room remained charged. Captain Torres, Dr. Phil said gently, Sarah said you saved her twice. Once from the fire and once from losing hope. Did you know the impact you had? Captain Torres looked at Sarah with amazement. I hoped. Every firefighter hopes the people they rescue go on to live meaningful lives, but we rarely get to see it. We show up at someone's worst moment, do our job, and move on. We almost never see what comes after. He turned toward Sarah. I carried you out of that building. You were so small and so scared. You looked at me and asked, "Are you an angel?" I told you no, I was just a firefighter. And you said the same thing again. I never forgot that. Sarah's eyes widened. I said that. You did, he smiled. And honestly, that moment changed me too. I was going through a difficult time. My marriage was ending, and I wasn't sure if I was making a difference. Then a little girl called me an angel. It reminded me why I chose this profession. Dr. Phil leaned forward. So in a way, Sarah helped you too. Captain Torres nodded. Yeah, she did. But Dr. Phil wasn't done. He reached beside his chair and picked up an envelope. Sarah, you told our producers that you've spent the last 10 years working as a social worker, helping kids in foster care. You said Captain Torres inspired you to help others. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. Captain Torres, you told us that after retiring, You started a nonprofit providing fire safety education to underserved communities. You said that little girl from 1996 was the reason why. Captain Torres looked surprised. How did you know that? Dr. Phil smiled. We do our homework. He handed the envelope to Sarah. This is from the 37 kids you've helped find permanent homes in the last decade. They wanted to tell you what you mean to them. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were letters, drawings, and photos from the children she'd worked with. As she looked through them, she cried again, this time out of happiness. You see this? Dr. Phil said to the audience. This is the ripple effect. Captain Torres saved Sarah. Sarah helps children. Those children will grow up and help others. One act of courage 20 years ago created waves of compassion that will continue far beyond us. The audience rose again, applauding. Dr. Phil then picked up a small velvet box and handed it to Captain Torres. Sarah told us she's worn this bracelet since she was 7. She said it was the only thing she grabbed when firefighters evacuated the building. It reminds her she survived. Sarah lifted her wrist, showing a simple silver bracelet with a heart charm. Sarah, Dr. Phil continued, Captain Torres has something for you. Captain Torres opened the box. Inside was a matching bracelet with a firefighter's helmet charm. I had this made when I retired, he said quietly. I always hoped I'd find you and give it to you. The date of the fire is engraved on the back. I wanted you to have something connecting us. Sarah held out her wrist, and Captain Torres clasped the new bracelet beside her old one. They sat together, hands joined, the two bracelets touching, 28 years of questions finally answered. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil let the moment sit before speaking again. Sarah, you came here seeking closure. You came to thank the man who saved your life. But what we've witnessed today goes beyond that. We've seen the strength of human connection. We've seen how one moment of courage can echo for decades. He faced the audience. How many of you have someone who saved you? Maybe not from a fire, but from despair, addiction, or giving up. Someone who showed up at the right moment and changed everything. Hands across the audience lifted. I want you to find them, Dr. Phil said firmly. Tell them what they mean to you. People need to hear that their actions mattered. He looked back at Sarah and Captain Torres. These two found each other today because Sarah was brave enough to share her story, and Captain Torres was brave enough to show up. That's all it takes. The courage to be open and the courage to care. The studio erupted in applause one last time. After the taping, Sarah and Captain Torres spent 2 hours talking in the green room. They exchanged contact information. Captain Torres invited Sarah to visit his nonprofit, and Sarah invited him to meet the children she worked with. 3 months later, they appeared together at a fire safety seminar in Phoenix, sharing their story with firefighters and social workers. Sarah launched a scholarship fund for foster youth entering public service, naming it the Captain Michael Torres Hope Foundation. Captain Torres expanded his nonprofit to include trauma support resources, calling it Sarah's Second Chance. 1 year after the episode aired, Sarah got married. Captain Torres walked her down the aisle. I never had a father, Sarah said during her speech, but I had a hero who taught me that family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up. In his toast, Captain Torres said, 20 years ago, I carried a little girl out of a burning building. Today, I walked that same girl into her new beginning. The ripple effect continues. Sarah's scholarship has helped 43 foster children attend college. Captain Torres's nonprofit has reached over 10,000 families with fire safety education. The Dr. Phil episode has been viewed more than 50 million times, inspiring people everywhere to reconnect with those who changed their lives. The message is simple. You never know when your courage becomes someone else's reason to keep going. Sarah now wears both bracelets on her left wrist. When children ask about them, she says, one reminds me I survived. The other reminds me why surviving matters. Together, they remind her that we are all connected by moments we'll never forget and by people we should always appreciate. The fire that nearly took Sarah's life in 1996 is now a distant memory. But the connection between a firefighter and the child he saved, and the many lives they've touched since, still burns bright, offering warmth to